All right. I am here with Vanessa, my wife. My name's DJ, and this is Chaz Shafer, um,
Hello.
financial expert extraordinaire. Can I call you that?
That's highly complimentary, but I only wish it was true.
Chaz and I have been talking over a number of weeks about this idea of how do we protect and provide for our families in terms of our legacy. It's something that I've just started thinking about as a 37-year-old man, and Chaz has been thinking about it a little longer than I have. So, Chaz, this is a passion of yours, I know, and I just thought maybe we could start by talking about why this is such a big deal to you, and also, what do you think this means for us to all step in and protect for our families longer than just immediately?
Yes. Well, it's a great question. You know, I had been in law school in the 70s and then somehow got intrigued by taxes and how important they are in our lives, in our financial lives. They're our biggest expense in life,
Mm.
taxes.
Mm.
And I thought, well, I need to know something about this.
Yeah.
And so I got intrigued and spent some more time in law school really working on taxes. And in that capacity, what I realized, and the tax law was different then, it's not as onerous right now, but you could work a lifetime and try to be prudent and save and have some money for your children and help them through school and be able to take care of yourself in your retirement. And then when you pass, at that time, you could end up paying anywhere from 55% up in taxes on your estate after having paid taxes on all the money that you put into savings.
Wow.
And I thought there was some statistic I'll never forget that said at the end of the day, you might end up paying 85% of what you make in taxes by the time you're gone. Now, this was, again, when we had higher estate taxes than we do right now. What happened in 2017, I think it was 2017, with this new tax law is there is really no tax on estates until you have a lot of money, until you have like $22 million between you and your spouse. So it's not the issue that it used to be. But in that whole process of studying about tax, I realized that there were all sorts of other issues just as important as how much money you're going to pay the government. And those concerned your family and making things easier for them when you pass. So that was my fundamental interest. And then, as I mentioned to you earlier, my dad was getting older about 20 years ago, and he developed a cancer. And we knew he didn't have a long time to go. And because of my interest in this, we talked, right? I just went to him and said, hey, we got to fix up your affairs. And he said, I've been thinking about that, and I have all these files over here and everything's organized. So we started going through things, and he realized that his original Social Security card, he didn't know where that was. His original birth certificate, which is required for a death certificate, which is required for insurance payouts. He didn't know where that stuff was. And he was a pretty darn responsible guy. But we lose track of those things over the years. And I thought, it's really important to sit down and figure out, first of all, what do you need? And then where is it? And where can we put it so we know where it is?
Yeah.
And that's what got me interested. And then more recently, in talking to my brother, who, as I mentioned, has a CPA firm, a fairly large firm in Colorado Springs. And he just in passing one day said, of all the people I talk to, there are so few who have made the right preparations for their passing. He said, I'll bet it's 70% of the people, and he pointed at me and said, your age, Chaz. There are probably 70% of the people your age who have not done practically any planning for this. And I was sort of shocked. Because I've been working on this and trying to update it for a number of years. So that's where my motivations come from. I think there's a real need for it, and it's not a comfortable subject for people or their families, but it's vital And in my dad's case, we got it all fixed up. He was very content to go, knowing that he had left things in the best order he could. And it was a blessing for us because he had lined it out step by step. Everything was there. We didn't have to go search for the name of um, insurance agents or how to access his medical insurance. And all of his desires for his funeral and arrangements afterwards, they were set out very nicely. So made it a lot easier for us as a family.
Yeah. This idea of death is, well, it's not one we like to think about, is it?
Not our favorite subject.
No. But, all the events around us, I think, has kicked into gear a lot of people recognizing that, our life is more temporal than we sometimes think it is. And I think in these seasons, it's this impetus to say, what can I do that I, basically protects my family now, but also protects my family later. Yes. And as we've talked about that, you've really developed some practical things, and that's kind of why we're talking here is, so today we're going to do the 101, and this little session is just like it's the why. It's the, why does God think this matters? And maybe I'll have you introduce us to a few of the terms and start us just thinking about where this is all going. And then the next session we're calling it the 201, is the practical. It's the, how do I make the plan? What should be in the plan? I know you've got a list for that, and you're going to talk to us about a legacy box and some things like that. And then the final one, we're calling it the 301, is going to be the, essentially the hard stuff. Let's actually implement this. What do I do if this offends my family members? I know for us, how do we talk to our parents about this? And then for us, how do we create this and keep it going? Because we may only live another year or less, or we may live another 30 or 40 years. So how do we get into a routine of keeping this accurate? Anyway, that's kind of the desire of these 3 sessions. So speaking of the spiritual part, the why, you were telling me earlier that you think this matters to God. Could you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Do you have that sheet? I think you set it up for screen share. I'm not sure it's easy.
Let me do that now.
Yeah.
Here we are. Can you see it?
I can, and I'm not sure if I can. Can you bring it down to the top?
Oh yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, first of all, your comments are just perceptive, and they're really good, and thank you for those. And you brought up a fascinating point, and that is, once we get all this done, you really do need to keep it up to date, because all of these things change from time to time. Mm-hmm. But the whole impetus behind this, I think, is sourced in God. And if you look at 1 Timothy there, give the people these instructions, and anyone who doesn't provide essentially for their family has denied the faith. I think it goes on to say, and is worse than an unbeliever. It's very strong language. And I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier, that as men, with the hierarchy that God has outlined for the family, we bear the responsibility for protecting our family as best we can into the future. And I think that's where these words go. And this verse goes right to that point. And of course, right underneath that, if you don't aim anywhere, you don't get anywhere. Mm. So you got to have a vision. You have to have a goal, or else things devolve into chaos. And I think that's particularly true here with financial planning and family finances. Mm. So I feel like everything we're talking about is sourced in God's word and his instruction for how we go about things as couples, and probably in the end as men who bear the responsibility for the direction their families take.
Thanks for sharing that, Chaz. I know when I was talking to Vanessa about this, you just said something about how it would be helpful to hear from a lawyer and a father.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think, I think we spend a lot of time. I can only think of it from a mother's perspective, because I don't have the lawyer's training. So I think it's helpful to hear from you, both hats. Why is this important as a father, or as you kind of already spoke to, as a son? Why was that important to have these conversations and to plan for this? And then also from the lawyer perspective, like, are there some things that reasons why this is important to do too, just from the legal side? Because I don't think I'll know that until I walk through that with a parent,
Mhm.
and then if I don't prepare well for my kids, I'm not sure I will ever know, the implications that it leaves for them if I don't do it well. So you speak to that side of like protecting, and I think we spend a lot of our energy doing that for our families. But in some ways, this is sort of a whole box that we can just put blinders on and
Hmm.
not even think about. We work hard to put food on the table, to pay our mortgages, to put bike helmets on, to do all these measures in every part of life. But when it comes to this, it's kind of like, well, I hope it works out.
Mm.
So maybe just speaking to that just from the different hats that you wear.
It's a great point you make. I mean, think of the energy and the time and the love that we invest in our kids and thinking
Yeah.
about their well-being. But
Yeah.
to avoid this, it unfortunately, in the position I've been to talk with families about this, or families who have not done this, or who are having big obstacles, they don't want to do it.
Hmm.
Um, then you see the aftermath, what happens when it's not been visited or worked out, and how it can result in misunderstandings that go very deep and start, let's say, at a passing or when somebody goes into a nursing home, and they never get worked out. And that is a tragedy
Hmm.
because family is so close. Look at the times we're in right now. And
Hmm.
we find ourselves reaching out to our brothers, our sisters, our kids' friends, and our greater family. And if there are big divisions there or chasms, and we can't speak on some, it's not a godly example to lead. But these things happen if we don't, uh, I think, work through people's expectations
Hmm.
about all of this, because we all think about finances, and we can't help but wonder what'll happen when dad and mom go. Or um, I just think it's such a wonderful thing to be transparent about. And my own feeling is to have these dry runs and talk about it in advance with your family. Other people may not agree with that, and I respect whatever the approach is. It's just important to have it in place so that things are smooth when these difficult emotional times arise with the passing of our parents and our loved ones, whether it's expected or not.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Chaz, just for sake of, I don't know, humor me here. Um,
Mhm.
let's say Vanessa and I pass, or you pass, and we don't have any of this will and testament and, all these sorts of things that we're going to talk about. Let's say we just have none of that, but we've planned financially. We have money in the bank. We have 401ks. Our house is working towards getting paid off. I mean, let's just say we've been fairly responsible in the past, but we haven't been responsible with our future. Can you walk us through what happens and what some of the struggles might be with that?
Well, it's a great question. And it makes some of this much easier in terms of what documents we have to put together and how much we have to spend on legal work, because the state of Colorado and almost every state has anticipated this situation.
Hmm.
And when you die intestate, it's called, when you die without a will or any kind of planning documents, the state infers your objectives and says, well, in almost every instance, if the dad dies unexpectedly, everything goes to the spouse and she'll take care of the children, and vice versa. And then if both mom and dad were to go in an airplane crash or something, then everything is going to go equally to the children. They make it pretty simple.
Hmm.
And in most cases, that may take care of people's objectives. Where the difficulties arise is if you have young children who are not capable of managing their own finances and might be inclined to spend what they have and have nothing left for school or for more important things later. If somebody is mentally challenged and can't do that, then needs for trusts arise where you pick out a trustworthy person or institution to manage things for beneficiaries who are often younger or not of age or aren't in a position to manage things themselves for a certain length of time under certain conditions until assets are turned over to them. So there's a place where lawyers can be very helpful with trusts. And wills often they're very helpful to name executors and personal representatives who take over for you in the event of death and manage your affairs through a court process so that the title to assets can change from you to heirs. And wills are very helpful if things are not going to just be done simply and evenly divided among everyone who is of age. But you can have so many complications that it's a good idea to get some good advice about this first and decide whether you need to spend the money on lawyers or on documents.
That's really helpful.
Does that address your question?
It does. It's basically it's a whole world that I don't live in until one day I will be forced to live in it.
Yes.
You know,
we're all going to go there eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the key components? We're finishing up our time here together in this first session, but what are some of the key components to look forward to that we're going to talk about in the next section in terms of, just familiarizing ourselves with what do we need to do?
Yeah, good. If you'd be willing to put that document back up, we can just highlight a few things if you'd like.
I'd like that. Here we go.
Great. Today, it used to be, at least in my dad's day 20 years ago, that he had files, hard physical files, and it was easy to go into the filing cabinet and find things. Now we have so many things on our devices. And getting into our devices is no easy thing. You see what happens when the FBI tries to get into people's Gmail account. And so we have to have some place we can go for current passwords and for an understanding of how to access people's documents and devices. And then, of course, hard copies and originals are really important in a lot of instances. So as I just breezed down through here, the first thing that I think is great is, and my dad did this, is you start with writing in the form of a letter to your family. You can say precious things, that maybe you weren't able to say earlier. You're gone now. Maybe there's a lawyer reading this, or maybe the spouse is reading this to the children, or somebody who's a trusted family member. And you can go through those kinds of things. You can also talk about funeral arrangements. Maybe there's some very special things you'd like, special people, special ways you want that done. You want a celebration instead of just a funeral, all those kinds of things. And, they make all these wonderful assemblages of pictures and family photography and things that can come into play here. And then, basically, how about some cash? When somebody goes unexpectedly, where do I go to pay the bills? Where do I go to get the grocery money? And there are things that most people are familiar with, payable on death designations that come on the back of a signature card when you go to the bank and set up your checking account. You can really eliminate a lot of frustration by filling out that POD, it's called, payable on death designation, on the back of the card, so that the bank will honor whoever's indicated there. And if it's your spouse or if it's an older person in the family, the bank will happily deliver the cash to them instead of having to wait to go through a court process, which might take a year.
Wow.
So that's pretty important stuff.
Mhm.
And then there are life insurance proceeds if life insurance is involved. And how do you get that? You need a death certificate. It has to be an original. How do you get a death certificate?
Mhm.
These kinds of things.
Mhm.
Uh, Social Security benefits that are available to family members if someone passes
Mhm.
in many instances. And you got to have an original Social Security card for that. What the heck did I do with my Social Security card when I got one at 16?
Right.
You may have to go get additional originals of these things, and that takes a lot of time. But it's much better to do it when we're living than it is to put that on our heirs who,
Yeah.
and especially in our world today that's so hyper cautious about privacy. And it's hard, even with legitimate need, to get cooperation from banks and title companies and social security offices, etc.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What are my assets? I told you about this fellow who had them buried in boxes in his backyard and under the mattress. Who knows where? Probably a tree fort somewhere. You gotta have some indication of what you have and where it is, and how do you get access to it. So these are the kinds of things
Yeah.
that we're talking. Safety deposit boxes.
Mhm.
That's a very unnerving situation when you go in and you have your husband had a safety deposit box with these important documents and money in it, and you can't access it because
Mhm.
it wasn't set up properly.
Mhm.
Um, and then if let's say something happens and you're not competent, you got hit by a car and you're in a coma, an extended coma, you need a living will. What are your
Mhm.
directions? How long are you supposed to stay
Mhm.
on the plug? Um, that's a very important document, and sometimes they've been signed with a lot of consideration, but nobody knows where they are.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, and then powers of attorney are very, very helpful, so that you give maybe your spouse a power of attorney so they can transact business in real estate or other assets that you may have. A medical power of attorney is really helpful. And I'm very fortunate to have a wonderful sister who is a doctor in Boston,
Mhm.
and she has our medical power of attorney. So if things happen and we're incompetent, we're in a coma or got hit by a truck and can't think, she can take over and make those decisions for us,
Mhm.
in conjunction with a living will. So, and who is your favorite attorney? And who's your favorite CPA? And what's their contact info? They may reside in another state somewhere.
Mhm.
So it's these kinds of things that we want to talk about.
Yeah.
Utilities. How do you keep the utilities going? Who do you talk to, and where are they? And simple things like that.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, your thoughts?
I think that's just, I mean, I'm excited
Yeah.
to actually process each one of those and ask you, how do we do this well?
Mhm.
And I just think it's great to have your willingness to walk us through this. And I know for anybody watching, it'll be the same thing. This is
Mhm.
just a very practical impetus for us to get a pen and paper out
Mhm.
and just start writing down, where are we at? What can we do to just set our families up for success?
Mhm.
So Chaz, thanks for being willing. Thanks for being willing to take this time.
Of course. I mean, we're all looking for whatever we can do at this particular time in our history, and
Yeah.
it's wonderful to have DJ to help me figure out how to work Zoom. We can do this sort of thing.
That's wonderful.
I think finally in the 301 section, we may mention also there that you deal with things like the decision to share this in an open way with your family while
Yeah.
you're clear and competent and lucid, or whether it may be better for various reasons to wait,
Mhm.
but to have it all organized for when you are going. And those they're valid reasons either way there. And
Mhm.
whereas everything is, there are very simple ways to organize this, and then there are more difficult ways. So we can talk about all of that. How do you really put it into effect and make it stand on its own so that it's readily accessible if it's ever needed? That's
Mhm.
something we can talk about in the final phase of this.
Yeah, I'm also interested. How would you talk about your parents? How about this with your parents? You did with your dad. And so for those of us in the category, how would we broach that in a tactful and
Yeah.
loving way? So,
Maybe you invite them to take a look at something like what we're doing that highlights some of the reasons and maybe touches in areas that they haven't thought about how important this can be for their children and
that's
for their
right.
family.
All right. So my mom and dad, you guys better be watching this. You better, I'm going to send it your way. You better have gotten to this point.
Oh, that's great.
All right, Chaz. Well, thank you so much for taking
Yeah,
this time.
yeah, very good. Well, we'll do this again and
Yeah.
organize a time that works for you and get more involved with the meat and potatoes of this thing.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do that.
All right.
All right.
Good to see you both.
Yeah.
Thanks.